The screams echoed through the concrete corridors of Research Station Omega-7 as Corvius pressed his back against the cold metal door, his scarred hands gripping the assault rifle with practiced desperation. Behind him, the heavy breathing of 6 other survivors created a symphony of terror that had become all too familiar in the 3 months since the world ended. The scratching and moaning from the other side of the door grew louder, more frantic, as if the creatures could smell the fear seeping through the reinforced steel. "How many?" whispered Lyralii, her voice barely audible above the cacophony. The brilliant virologist clutched a worn leather satchel against her chest, protecting the precious research data that might hold humanity's last chance. Her once pristine lab coat was now stained with blood and grime, a testament to the nightmare they'd all been living. Corvius closed his eyes and listened, counting the distinct sounds of clawing fingers and shuffling feet. "Too many," he replied grimly. His military training had prepared him for war, but nothing could have prepared him for this, an enemy that felt no pain, knew no fear, and consumed everything in its path with relentless hunger. Zephyra, barely 16 but aged beyond her years by the apocalypse, crouched near the emergency lighting panel. Her unusual violet eyes seemed to glow in the dim red light as she worked to override the security systems. There was something different about her, something that had kept their small group alive when larger, better-armed communities had fallen. She could sense them coming, could predict their movements in ways that defied explanation. "The air ducts," she said suddenly, her head snapping toward the ceiling. "They're learning. Using the maintenance tunnels." Thaddeus, the graying former CDC director, adjusted his cracked glasses and moved closer to the group's center. In his weathered hands, he held a small device that beeped steadily, a radiation detector that had been their constant companion since discovering the true nature of the outbreak. "The readings are getting stronger," he murmured. "Whatever's controlling them, it's getting closer." Nyx, their scout and the group's most lethal member despite her slight frame, checked her ammunition with fluid precision. Her movements were like liquid shadow, earning her the nickname from ancient mythology. She'd lost 3 fingers on her left hand to a zombie bite weeks ago, but had managed to stop the infection spread through sheer will and a red-hot knife blade. "We can't stay here," she said, her voice carrying the weight of hard-earned wisdom. "This position is compromised." Caspian, hunched over a tablet displaying the facility's schematics, looked up with urgent eyes. The former NASA engineer had rigged their communication systems and kept their electronics running when everything else had failed. "I'm reading massive movement in sectors 7 through 12. They're not just hunting, they're coordinating. It's like watching a military operation." The revelation sent chills through the group. In the early days, the infected had been mindless, driven only by base hunger. But something had changed. They'd begun moving in patterns, setting traps, even using tools in rudimentary ways. The implications were terrifying. Serafina, who had appointed herself the group's protector after losing her own children in the first wave, moved to comfort young Indigo. The 13-year-old had been found 3 weeks ago, alone in a supermarket, having survived by pure instinct and an uncanny ability to remain undetected. The woman's maternal instincts had found new purpose in keeping the 2 youngest members alive, though the constant stress had aged her dramatically. "Mama Sarah," Indigo whispered, using the nickname she'd given the woman who'd become her surrogate mother. "I can hear them in the walls. They're talking." The words froze everyone in place. Talking was impossible, the infected had lost all capacity for speech within hours of transformation. Yet Indigo's hearing had proven unnaturally acute, and her warnings had saved them countless times. Corvius made the decision that would define their next move. "We go down. Sub-level 3 has the emergency protocols, and if Lyralii's research is correct, we might find what we need in the deep storage facility." He looked at each member of their unlikely family, seeing the exhaustion, the fear, but also the determination that had kept them alive this long. The door behind them shuddered under increasing pressure. Time was running out, and their sanctuary was about to become their tomb. In the distance, something that might have once been human let out a sound that was part shriek, part roar, and completely unnatural. It was answered by dozens of similar calls, echoing through the facility's maze of corridors like a twisted choir announcing the end of all things. Lyralii clutched her research tighter, knowing that within her files lay either humanity's salvation or the confirmation of their inevitable extinction. The choice of which it would be lay in the hands of 7 exhausted survivors and whatever horrors awaited them in the depths below. The emergency stairwell descended into darkness thick enough to taste, each step taking them deeper into the bowels of Research Station Omega 7. Corvius led the way, his tactical flashlight cutting through the gloom while painting dancing shadows on the concrete walls. Behind him, the others moved in practiced silence, their footsteps muffled by months of learning to survive in a world where sound meant death. 3 levels down, Caspian's tablet flickered with structural data that told a disturbing story. The lower levels weren't designed for human habitation, he whispered, his voice barely carrying to the others. According to these blueprints, Sublevel 3 was built for containment. Biological containment. Lyralii's grip tightened on her satchel. The research facility had been her second home for nearly a decade, but even she had never been granted access to the deepest levels. The official records claimed they housed backup power systems and storage, but the security clearances required told a different story. The Helix Project, she murmured, remembering fragments of conversations she'd overheard in administrative meetings. They were working on something called the Helix Project. Thaddeus stumbled slightly, catching himself against the railing. The radiation detector in his hand had begun beeping more rapidly as they descended, its urgent warning suggesting they were approaching something that shouldn't exist. Genetic modification research was suspended after the Jakarta incident, he said, his medical background providing context for fears he didn't want to voice. But if they continued the work here? The implications hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Zephyra, moving with the strange grace that had marked her as different, suddenly stopped mid-step. Her violet eyes, which seemed to glow brighter in the darkness, fixed on something the others couldn't see. "They're not following us down here," she said, her voice carrying a mixture of relief and apprehension. "Something's keeping them away." Nyx, bringing up the rear with weapons ready, confirmed the observation. The sounds of pursuit that had been their constant companion for hours had faded to nothing. The silence was more unnerving than the chaos above. Whatever's down here, even the infected are afraid of it. They reached Sublevel 3 to find a corridor lined with containment cells, each sealed behind reinforced glass that had been designed to contain far more than ordinary research subjects. Emergency lighting cast an eerie green glow over everything, creating an underwater atmosphere that made breathing feel labored. Along the walls, computer terminals flickered with data streams that suggested the facility's automated systems were still operational. Indigo pressed close to Serafina, her young face pale with instinctive fear. "This place feels wrong," she whispered. "Like something sleeping that shouldn't be woken up." Caspian approached one of the active terminals, his engineering expertise overriding his survival instincts. The data flowing across the screen revealed experiments that violated every ethical boundary science had established. Genetic splicing, viral modification, human trial records that suggested the research had continued long after official oversight had ended. "Dear God," he breathed, scrolling through files that documented the deliberate creation of what they now faced above. The research station hadn't been studying the infection, they had created it. The zombie outbreak wasn't a natural disaster or foreign attack, but the result of their own government's attempts to weaponize human biology. The revelation hit the group like a physical blow, recontextualizing everything they thought they knew about their situation. Lyralii's professional composure cracked as she read over Caspian's shoulder. Her own research, her life's work in virology, had been perverted into something monstrous. The data showed multiple iterations of the virus, each more virulent than the last, with test subjects designated only by numbers rather than names. Phase 7, she read aloud, her voice hollow with horror. Successful integration of collective consciousness protocols. Subject retention of motor functions combined with elimination of individual identity. The pieces began falling into place with devastating clarity. The infected weren't losing their intelligence, they were being connected to something else, something that was learning to use their collective minds as a weapon. The coordination they'd observed, the increasing sophistication of the attacks, wasn't evolution. It was design. Thaddeus's radiation detector reached a crescendo of warning beeps before falling silent, its circuits fried by whatever energy source lay ahead. The readings were off the charts, he reported grimly. Whatever's powering this place isn't conventional. At the end of the corridor, sealed behind blast doors that would have stopped a tank, something waited. The terminal beside the entrance showed a single word in pulsing red letters, Helix. Below it, a countdown timer displayed days, hours, and minutes in descending order. The number suggested they had less than 72 hours before something called Final Protocol would initiate. Corvius studied the blast doors with a soldier's eye for defensive positions. They were designed to keep something in, not out. The implications were terrifying, but they'd come too far to turn back now. "We need to know what's behind those doors," he said, though every instinct screamed against opening them. The truth about humanity's extinction lay waiting in the darkness beyond, along with whatever slim hope Lyraliai's research might provide. But as they prepared to breach the final barrier, each member of their group understood that some knowledge came with a price that might be too terrible to pay. The blast doors opened with a pneumatic hiss that seemed to suck the air from their lungs, revealing a chamber that defied comprehension. Corvius stepped forward first, his weapon raised despite knowing it would be useless against whatever lay beyond. The room stretched away into shadows that seemed to move independently of their light sources, and at its center sat something that had once been human. The figure in the containment chair was connected to a web of cables and tubing that pulsed with bioluminescent fluid. Its eyes, once human, now glowed with the same violet light that marked Zephyra as different. When it spoke, its voice carried harmonics that suggested multiple speakers, as if an entire choir was trapped within a single throat. "Welcome," it said, and Lyraliai recognized the voice despite the months of change. Dr. Marcus Chen, the project's lead researcher, had become something beyond human or infected. "I have been waiting for you to find me. To find the truth." Zephyra stepped forward, drawn by a connection she couldn't understand. Her own eyes blazed brighter in response to his presence, and for the first time since joining their group, she looked truly afraid. "You're like me," she whispered. "But different." "Wrong." Chen's transformed features twisted into something that might have been a smile. "Not wrong, child. Evolved. You are the first of the successful integrations, the bridge between what we were and what we must become. The infection was never meant to destroy humanity, it was meant to save it." The revelation struck them like a physical blow. Thaddeus, his medical training warring with the impossibility of what he witnessed, approached the monitoring equipment surrounding Chen's chair. The readings showed brain activity patterns that exceeded normal human parameters by orders of magnitude. "The collective consciousness," he breathed. "You're connected to all of them." "Every infected soul," Chen confirmed, his multiple-toned voice filled with something that might have been compassion. "Their individuality was the price paid for our species' survival. In 18 months, solar radiation levels will increase beyond Earth's ability to sustain complex life. The infection creates immunity to radiation poisoning while maintaining motor function. Humanity would have died regardless, this way, something of us survives." Caspian's tablet chimed with incoming data as it connected to the chamber's central computer. The information flooding the screen painted a picture of cosmic inevitability, solar flares and radiation increases that would sterilize the planet's surface within 2 years. The infection wasn't humanity's destroyer but its desperate attempt at evolution. "The children born after integration show enhanced resistance," Chen continued, his gaze focusing on Indigo with uncomfortable intensity. "Those exposed during development adapt rather than succumb. You represent the future of human consciousness within collective form." Serafina instinctively pulled Indigo closer, maternal instincts overriding scientific curiosity. You're talking about deliberately infecting children, she said, her voice carrying the weight of a mother's fury. You're talking about ending their humanity. I'm talking about preserving it, Chen replied. Individual consciousness was always humanity's greatest weakness and strength. In collective form, we retain memory, knowledge, and purpose while gaining the resilience necessary for survival. The pain of transformation is temporary, the extinction of our species would be permanent. Nix, who had remained silent during the exchange, spoke with the voice of someone who had witnessed too much death. How many died for your experiment? How many families were destroyed for this salvation? 7 billion would have died anyway, Chen answered without emotion. This way, their essence continues within the collective. Their memories, their love, their dreams, all preserved and shared among the surviving consciousness. Lyralei stepped forward, her scientific mind racing through the implications. The research data in her satchel suddenly took on new meaning as she understood the true scope of the project. The final protocol, she said. It's not about stopping the infection, it's about completing it. Global saturation, Chen confirmed. In 70 hours, atmospheric dispersal will begin. Every remaining human will have the choice to adapt or perish when the radiation increases. The infection provides the only path to survival. The chamber fell silent except for the steady pulse of the machinery keeping Chen alive and connected to his collective consciousness. Each member of their group processed the information in their own way, understanding that everything they'd fought to preserve was built on a foundation that was already crumbling. Zephyra's enhanced abilities suddenly made terrible sense. She wasn't just immune to the infection, she was the prototype for humanity's future. Indigo's survival instincts weren't just luck but adaptation to a world that demanded evolution. Even their small group's ability to work together despite overwhelming odds might have been influenced by exposure to the collective consciousness emanating from the facility. Corvius, trained to make impossible decisions in crisis situations, found himself facing a choice that transcended military strategy. Preserve individual humanity and watch the species die, or embrace transformation and lose what made them human in the first place. The countdown timer continued its relentless march toward zero, while somewhere above them, the infected masses waited with patient intelligence for the final phase of their creator's grand design to unfold. The decision shattered their group like glass against stone. Corvius stood firm in his refusal to accept Chen's vision, his military discipline warring against the scientists' logic of necessary sacrifice. We don't get to choose extinction for humanity, he declared, checking his weapon as if it could somehow solve their impossible situation. There has to be another way. Lyralei clutched her research data closer, her mind racing through viral vectors and genetic modifications that might offer alternatives. If the collective consciousness can be maintained without losing individual identity, she said, her voice gaining strength with scientific possibility, then the integration process could be modified. The solution doesn't have to mean the end of what makes us human. Chen's transformed features registered something approaching pity. Individual consciousness is inefficient, prone to conflict and self-destruction. The collective eliminates war, poverty, hatred, all the flaws that brought humanity to the brink of extinction even before the solar radiation. It also eliminates choice, Nix said quietly, her scarred hand touching the weapon at her side. Without the right to be wrong, to be flawed, to be individual, we're not human anymore. We're just very sophisticated machines wearing human faces. Zephyra moved away from the group, drawn toward one of the chamber's secondary monitors. Her violet eyes reflected the scrolling data as she absorbed information at speeds that defied normal human cognition. There's something else, she said, her voice carrying new urgency. The collective isn't unified. There are fragments, resistance nodes where individual consciousness is fighting back. The revelation changed everything. Caspian rushed to join her at the terminal, his engineering background helping him interpret the data streams. She's right, he confirmed. The collective consciousness shows fracture patterns, groups of infected who are maintaining some level of individual thought. They're fighting the integration from the inside. Chen's multiple-voice harmony developed discordant notes as the information registered. "Impossible," he said, but uncertainty crept into his tone. The integration process was perfected through thousands of test subjects. Individual resistance should be eliminated within hours of infection. Thaddeus approached Chen's monitoring equipment with renewed purpose, his medical training focused on the impossibility before them. "Human consciousness is more resilient than you calculated," he observed, studying the brain activity patterns. "Love, fear, hope, these emotions create neural pathways that resist integration. The collective can absorb knowledge and memory, but it can't fully suppress the human soul." Indigo, who had been silent during the exchange, suddenly spoke with clarity that belied her 13 years. "I can hear them," she said, her young voice carrying the weight of terrible understanding. "The ones who are still fighting. They're calling for help." The chamber's atmospheric processors began cycling more rapidly, responding to elevated stress levels among its occupants. Warning lights flickered across multiple systems as Chen's connection to the collective registered the new information. Through his enhanced consciousness, he was experiencing the resistance firsthand, pockets of individual thought that refused to be absorbed, fighting to maintain their humanity against overwhelming odds. "The final protocol must proceed," Chen said, but his certainty had cracked. "The radiation will kill everyone who remains uninfected. Integration is the only path to species survival." Serafina stepped forward, her maternal instincts transforming into fierce determination. "Then we find a third option," she declared. "We help the ones who are fighting back regain their humanity, and we find a way to survive the radiation without losing ourselves." Corvius nodded grimly, his tactical mind already working through the logistics of what seemed impossible. "If there are resistance nodes within the collective, we can use them. Turn the infection's own network against itself, help individual consciousness reassert control. The process would require massive computational power and genetic manipulation capabilities," Lyralii said, her scientific training warring with desperate hope. "We'd need access to the facility's primary research labs and the collective's own communication network." Chen's form convulsed as conflicting impulses warred within his enhanced consciousness. Part of him, the scientist who had once worked alongside Lyralii, who had believed in preserving human knowledge and dignity, fought against the collective's imperative for universal integration. "The resistance nodes," he managed to say through visible strain, "they're concentrated in Sector 12. The original test subjects who maintained emotional connections to their human lives." Nyx was already moving toward the chamber's exit, her weapons ready for whatever lay ahead. "Then that's where we go," she said simply. "We find the ones who are still fighting and help them remember what it means to be human." The countdown timer showed 63 hours remaining, but their mission had transformed from mere survival to something approaching redemption. They would venture into the heart of the collective consciousness itself, seeking the fragments of humanity that refused to surrender to forced evolution. As they prepared to leave Chen's chamber, Zephyra looked back at the transformed scientist with something approaching compassion. "You can choose to help us," she said. "Part of you is still human enough to make that choice." Chen's reply was lost in the harmonics of collective voices, but as they departed, his monitoring systems began transmitting data that would prove crucial in the battle ahead, information about the resistance nodes and the neural pathways that might yet save both individual consciousness and species survival. The journey to Sector 12 led them through corridors that pulsed with bioluminescent veins, the facility itself having been transformed into a living organism that responded to the collective consciousness. Caspian's tablet showed structural changes that defied engineering principles, walls that breathed, floors that shifted to accommodate movement, ceiling panels that opened and closed like enormous eyelids. "The building is alive," he whispered, his voice filled with professional awe and personal terror. "The infection didn't just change humans, it's integrated with the entire infrastructure." Corvius maintained point position, though his military training felt inadequate against an enemy that could manipulate their environment. Each step forward brought them deeper into something that was no longer a research facility but a massive biological entity with its own agenda. The air itself felt thick with purpose, as if they were breathing the thoughts of something vast and alien. Lyraliai's research data had taken on new significance as she cross-referenced Chen's information with her own viral studies. The resistance nodes aren't random, she realized, her voice gaining excitement despite their circumstances. They're forming around specific emotional triggers, parental love, romantic attachment, traumatic memories that carry intense personal meaning. Thaddeus's improvised radiation detector, rebuilt from medical equipment in his bag, showed readings that fluctuated wildly as they moved through the transformed facility. The biological integration is protecting against radiation exposure, he observed. Whatever else the infection has done, it's succeeded in creating immunity to the solar radiation that's coming. Zephyra moved with increasing confidence through the organic corridors, her enhanced abilities allowing her to navigate the living architecture with preternatural skill. The building recognizes me, she said, her violet eyes reflecting the bioluminescent patterns in the walls. It thinks I'm part of the collective, but I can feel the resistance. It's like whispers in the dark. They encountered their first resistance node in what had once been the facility's cafeteria. 3 figures stood motionless in the center of the room, their eyes glowing with the familiar violet light of the infected, but their posture suggested an internal struggle that was visible in their trembling forms. Unlike the coordinated movement of the collective above, these individuals appeared to be fighting against invisible restraints. Indigo approached them with the fearless curiosity of youth, her enhanced hearing picking up sounds the others couldn't detect. "They're trying to speak," she said. "But something is blocking their voices." Nyx raised her weapons as the 3 figures turned toward their group, but their movements lacked the predatory focus of the collective. Instead, they reached out with gestures that seemed almost pleading, their faces contorted with the effort of maintaining individual thought. Sarah Martinez, Research Assistant Level 2, Lyraliai read from the identification badge of the nearest figure. "I knew her. She had a daughter who was born with cognitive disabilities." Sarah spent every free moment researching treatments. The mention of the woman's daughter triggered a visible response. Sarah's glowing eyes flickered, and for a moment, her expression became purely human. "Emma," she whispered, the single word breaking through the collective's control. "My Emma." Serafina stepped forward, her maternal instincts recognizing the desperate love in the woman's voice. "Emma needs you to be strong," she said gently. "She needs her mother to fight back." The effect was immediate and dramatic. Sarah's form convulsed as competing neural pathways warred for control, the collective consciousness attempting to reassert dominance while her individual identity fought for autonomy. The other 2 figures, a maintenance worker still wearing his name tag identifying him as Roberto Vega, and a security guard whose badge read Patricia Kim, began showing similar signs of internal conflict. Caspian's tablet registered massive data fluctuations as the resistance node strengthened, individual consciousness pushing back against collective integration. "It's working," he reported with growing excitement. "Their neural patterns are reasserting individual identity. The emotional connections are stronger than the collective's control protocols." Thaddeus approached the struggling figures with medical caution, studying their vital signs through handheld scanners. The integration isn't permanent, he realized. The collective consciousness is maintaining control through constant neural suppression, but strong emotional triggers can break through the barriers. Corvius began to see tactical possibilities in their discovery. "If we can identify and trigger the resistance nodes throughout the facility, we might be able to create widespread breakdown in collective control. Turn their own network into a tool for liberation rather than domination." Lyraliai was already working through the genetic implications, her research data providing insights into the neurochemical processes involved. "The collective relies on suppressing individual emotional responses," she said. "But love, grief, protective instincts, these create neural pathways that are too deeply embedded to completely erase." Roberto suddenly spoke, his voice fighting through the collective's influence. "Mi familia," he said, tears streaming down his face. "My children. They were supposed to evacuate to the safe zones." Patricia followed, her security training warring with collective directives. "Protect and serve," she managed to say. Sworn oath. "Can't abandon my post." The three figures stood before them, caught between two realities: the collective consciousness that promised unity and efficiency, and the individual humanity that demanded the right to love, to grieve, to choose their own fate even if it meant suffering and uncertainty. With 57 hours remaining until final protocol, they had discovered humanity's secret weapon against forced evolution. The very emotions and attachments that the collective sought to eliminate were proving to be indestructible anchors to individual consciousness. The war for humanity's soul would be fought not with weapons, but with love. The resistance spread like wildfire through the facility's living corridors as word of the breakthrough reached other nodes through pathways even the collective couldn't fully control. Corvius led their expanded group, now including Sarah, Roberto, and Patricia, deeper into Sector 12, where Zephyr's enhanced senses detected dozens of individuals caught in the same struggle between collective unity and personal identity. "The building is fighting back," Caspian reported, his tablet showing system conflicts as the facility's integrated consciousness tried to suppress the growing rebellion. Emergency lighting flickered between the collective's bioluminescent patterns and the harsh fluorescent illumination of normal operations, creating a strobe effect that made navigation increasingly difficult. Lyralii worked feverishly with her research data, cross-referencing Chen's information with the behavioral patterns they'd observed. "The collective's primary weakness is emotional attachment," she confirmed. "But we need to reach the central processing core, the nexus where all infected consciousness converges. If we can trigger a cascade failure there, the individual minds might reassert permanent control." Thaddeus, monitoring the newly liberated individuals, made a disturbing discovery. "Their freedom is temporary," he warned. "The collective is adapting, developing countermeasures to emotional triggers. We have maybe 12 hours before it learns to permanently suppress individual consciousness." The urgency drove them forward through increasingly hostile territory. The facility's walls pulsed with agitation, and they could hear the collective consciousness marshalling its forces above them. Through the building's transformed structure, thousands of infected individuals moved with renewed purpose, converging on their location with mechanical precision. Serafina stayed close to Indigo, her protective instincts heightened by the presence of other children among the resistance nodes. In the facility's former daycare center, they found a group of infected staff members whose individual consciousness had been preserved by their overwhelming desire to protect the children who had been evacuated before the outbreak. "Miss Jenny!" Indigo exclaimed, recognizing one of the daycare workers despite the violet glow of her eyes. The woman's face twisted with the effort of maintaining individual thought, but at the sound of her name, her expression cleared momentarily. "The children," Miss Jenny managed to say. "Are they safe? Did they get to the evacuation centers?" Nix, scanning their surroundings for threats, noticed something crucial. "The collective's response is getting slower," she observed. "The resistance nodes are creating interference patterns. It's like jamming their communication network." Indeed, as more individuals broke free from collective control, the facility's integrated consciousness began showing signs of strain. Corridors that had responded instantly to their presence now hesitated, and the bioluminescent patterns in the walls flickered with uncertainty. Zephyra, her violet eyes now blazing with purpose rather than infection, led them toward the central core. "I can feel it," she said. "The main consciousness. It's afraid. It never planned for resistance on this scale." The central processing core lay behind blast doors that made Chen's chamber look simple by comparison. The facility's security systems, now operated by collective consciousness, had sealed the area with every available barrier. But Roberto, his maintenance expertise intact despite his transformation, found manual overrides that the collective hadn't anticipated. "Emergency protocols," he explained, his individual identity stronger now with each passing moment. "Building codes require manual overrides that can't be integrated into automated systems. Safety regulations saved more than just lives." Patricia, her security training reasserting itself, took point as they breached the final barriers. "Standard tactical formation," she commanded, falling back into familiar patterns of leadership. "Protect the civilians, maintain visual contact, watch for hostile movement." The central core chamber defied description, a vast organic sphere suspended in the center of a circular room, pulsing with the combined consciousness of millions of infected individuals. Neural pathways spread out from the central mass like a three-dimensional spider web, each strand carrying the thoughts and memories of transformed humans. At the sphere's base, they found the source of the countdown, a massive computer system that had been partially integrated with biological components. The final protocol wasn't just atmospheric dispersal of the infection, it was complete neural integration of every remaining human consciousness on Earth, whether they were infected or not. "Remote consciousness transfer," Lyralii breathed, understanding the true scope of Chen's plan. "Even humans who resist infection will have their minds absorbed into the collective through quantum entanglement protocols. Physical immunity won't matter if our consciousness can be directly accessed." Caspian's engineering skills had evolved during their journey, enhanced by exposure to the facility's integrated systems. "I can disrupt the protocol," he said, his hands moving across interfaces that seemed to respond to thought as much as touch. "But we'll need to coordinate with every resistance node simultaneously. One massive pulse of individual consciousness asserting control over collective systems." The chamber's organic walls began contracting as the collective consciousness recognized the threat they represented. Time was running out, they had 43 hours until final protocol, but the collective was mobilizing every resource to stop them before they could complete their sabotage. Corvius made the tactical decision that would determine humanity's fate. "We make our stand here," he declared. "Hold this position while Caspian and Lyralii work on the disruption protocol. Everything we've fought for comes down to the next few hours." As if in response to his words, the first wave of collective-controlled infected reached their position, moving with coordinated precision toward the chamber that housed both humanity's doom and its last hope for freedom. The battle for humanity's consciousness erupted with the fury of 7 billion souls crying out against forced unity. Wave after wave of infected surged into the core chamber, their movements perfectly coordinated by the collective intelligence, but Corvius and his team fought with the desperate innovation that only individual thought could provide. Nyx danced between the attackers with lethal precision, her weapons finding targets while her scarred hands moved with the grace of someone fighting for more than survival, fighting for the right to remain herself. Patricia and Roberto flanked her, their professional training intact despite their transformation, creating a defensive perimeter around Caspian and Lyralii as they worked frantically at the central console. "The resistance nodes are responding," Lyralii called out over the chaos, her fingers flying across interfaces that seemed to grow more organic with each passing moment. "But the collective is adapting faster than we anticipated. We need more time." Sarah, fighting with the fierce determination of a mother separated from her child, used her research background to assist with the technical aspects of their sabotage. "Emma," she whispered like a mantra, each repetition strengthening her individual identity against the collective's pull. "I'm doing this for Emma." Thaddeus, pressed into combat despite his medical background, found himself treating wounded resistance fighters while simultaneously analyzing the collective's biological structure. "The core is vulnerable," he shouted over the sounds of battle. "It's not truly integrated, it's a hybrid system that still relies on technological components." Zephyra moved through the combat zone like a force of nature, her enhanced abilities turned against the collective that had created them. She could anticipate the infected's movements, predict their coordinated attacks, and counter them with strategies that seemed to emerge from pure instinct. "The collective consciousness is fragmenting," she reported. "The resistance is spreading faster than it can compensate." Indigo, protected by Seraphina's fierce maternal instincts, used her extraordinary hearing to provide early warning of incoming attacks. "More coming from the North Corridor," she called out. "But some of them are fighting each other, the resistance is reaching them too." Indeed, the battlefield was becoming increasingly chaotic as more infected individuals broke free from collective control. Former colleagues recognized each other, remembered their human relationships, and began fighting alongside the resistance rather than against it. The collective's greatest strength, its unified coordination, was becoming its greatest weakness as individual consciousness reasserted itself throughout the network. Caspian's hands moved across controls that seemed to respond to his thoughts as much as his touch, the facility's integrated systems recognizing his engineering expertise even as they fought against his intentions. "I can trigger a cascade failure," he announced, "but it requires simultaneous activation from multiple resistance nodes throughout the facility. We need perfect timing." The collective consciousness, recognizing the threat to its existence, began withdrawing infected individuals from the upper levels, concentrating its forces around the core chamber. The organic walls pulsed with increasing agitation as millions of connected minds focused their attention on the small group threatening to unravel everything they had become. Miss Jenny, fighting alongside other daycare workers to protect the memory of children they had cared for, suddenly cried out with inspiration. "The children's emergency broadcast system," she said. "We used it for evacuation drills, it reaches every speaker in the facility." Lyraliai's eyes lit up with understanding. Emotional triggers broadcast simultaneously to every resistance node. If we can reach them all at once with the right stimulus. She began working with renewed urgency, adapting her viral research to create an informational payload that would strengthen individual consciousness rather than suppress it. The battle reached its crescendo as the collective made one final push to stop them. Hundreds of infected poured into the chamber, their coordinated movements creating a living tide that threatened to overwhelm the defenders. But at the critical moment, something remarkable happened. Many of the attackers began hesitating, their individual consciousness fighting back against collective commands. "Now!" Corvius shouted, recognizing the moment when the collective's control was weakest. Caspian activated the Cascade protocol while Lyralii triggered her emotional broadcast through the emergency system. The sound that emerged from every speaker in the facility wasn't words or music, but something more primal, the sound of a child's laughter, a parent's lullaby, a lover's whispered endearment. Every human emotion that the collective had tried to suppress came flooding back through the network all at once. The effect was instantaneous and overwhelming. The organic sphere at the chamber's center convulsed as millions of individual consciousness simultaneously rejected collective unity. Throughout the facility, infected individuals stopped moving in coordination and began remembering who they had been before transformation. The countdown to final protocol stuttered and froze at 37 hours, then began counting backward as systems throughout the integrated network chose individual autonomy over collective efficiency. The war for humanity's soul had been won not through violence, but through the simple assertion that the right to be individual was worth any cost. But victory came with a price that none of them had anticipated, as the massive energy release from the collective's collapse began tearing the facility apart around them. The facility shuddered with the death throes of artificial unity as the collective consciousness unraveled, its organic components withering while technological systems sparked and failed in cascading waves. Corvius led the evacuation through corridors that were returning to mere concrete and steel, the bioluminescent veins fading to leave behind only the harsh fluorescent lighting of a normal research station. Throughout the complex, thousands of newly liberated individuals stood in confusion, their memories intact but their understanding fractured by months of collective existence. Lyralii moved among them with medical purpose, her research data now serving as a guide for treating the psychological trauma of forced integration rather than a weapon for humanity's transformation. The integration left physical changes, Thaddeus reported as he examined the liberated survivors. Enhanced radiation resistance, improved immune systems, accelerated healing. The collective's biological modifications remain even after consciousness separation. The implications were profound. Humanity had gained the tools necessary for surviving the coming solar radiation without sacrificing individual identity. Chen's vision of species survival could be achieved without the horror of collective consciousness, though the path forward would require careful management of the new capabilities. Zephyra, her violet eyes now dimmed to a soft lavender that spoke of individual choice rather than collective control, worked to establish communication with resistance groups worldwide. Her enhanced abilities remained intact, but they served her personal decisions rather than network imperatives. Other facilities are reporting similar cascade failures, she announced. The resistance spread through quantum entanglement faster than the collective could compensate. Caspian's engineering expertise proved crucial in establishing new communication networks as the world's infrastructure adapted to the sudden absence of collective coordination. "We're getting signals from survivor settlements across 6 continents," he reported. The final protocol was stopped globally. Humanity keeps its individual consciousness. The price of victory became clear as they reached the surface. The facility's collapse had created a massive crater where Research Station Omega-7 once stood, and similar destruction was reported at integrated sites worldwide. The collective's death had taken its physical infrastructure with it, leaving humanity to rebuild from scattered communities of enhanced but traumatized survivors. Serafina held Indigo close as they watched the sunrise over a transformed world, her maternal instincts now focused on helping a generation of children who had gained extraordinary abilities along with terrible memories. "We'll need new schools," she said quietly. "New ways of helping them understand what they've become." Sarah Martinez, reunited with her daughter Emma through the global communication network, wept with joy that transcended her physical transformation. The enhanced cognitive abilities from her integration had given her new insights into treating Emma's condition, but more importantly, she remained herself, a mother whose love had proven stronger than any collective imperative. Roberto and Patricia, along with thousands of others, faced the challenge of rebuilding society with enhanced capabilities but without the collective coordination that had made complex tasks seemingly effortless. Democracy, individuality, and the beautiful chaos of human disagreement returned to a species that had briefly experienced the terrible efficiency of unity. Miss Jenny and the other daycare workers began developing new educational protocols for children who could hear electromagnetic frequencies and see in spectrums that defied normal human perception. The next generation would grow up in a world where individual choice coexisted with enhanced abilities, where humanity could survive cosmic catastrophe without surrendering what made them human. Nyx, her scarred hands now steadier than they had been since the infection began, established new security protocols for a world where enhanced humans would need to coexist with those who had remained unchanged. The challenge of maintaining individual freedom while preventing the abuse of enhanced abilities would define humanity's political future. As the sun climbed higher, its radiation levels already beginning to increase toward the deadly thresholds Chen's research had predicted, the survivors felt the enhanced immunity working within their cells. They would survive the solar catastrophe that had driven Chen to his collective solution, but they would face it as individuals rather than components of a unified consciousness. Lyralii, her life's work now focused on helping humanity adapt to its enhanced state while preserving individual identity, established research protocols that included ethical oversight and individual consent, safeguards that Chen's desperation had abandoned. The future would bring challenges that required both enhanced abilities and human wisdom. The countdown timer, now frozen at 37 hours and 23 minutes, served as a monument to the moment when humanity chose difficult freedom over easy unity. In the distance, other survivor groups were establishing similar memorials, marking the day when 7 billion individual souls refused to become one voice. As they prepared to leave the ruins of Research Station Omega-7, each member of their small group carried both enhancement and trauma, hope and sorrow. They had saved humanity's right to individuality, but at the cost of simplicity. The future would be messy, contentious, and beautifully human, exactly as it should be. The last hope had become the first dawn of a new kind of humanity, enhanced but not enslaved, united by choice rather than compulsion, facing the cosmos with the magnificent stubbornness of billions of individual souls who refused to surrender their right to be wrong, to be different, to be themselves. In the growing light of a more dangerous but more honest day, they walked forward into uncertainty, carrying the future of human consciousness in their enhanced but stubbornly individual hearts.